Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the ultimate Test Your Quran Knowledge. Today we have 50 questions in 7 seconds to test your knowledge. Let us begin. How many surahs are in the Quran? (114). How many juz, paras, are in the Quran? (30). Which is the longest surah in the Quran? Surah Al-Baqarah. Which is the shortest surah in the Quran? Surah Al-Kawthar. Which surah is called the heart of the Quran? Surah Yasin. Which surah must be recited in every rakat of salah? Surah Al-Fatiha. How many verses, ayahs, are in the Quran approximately? (6,236). Which surah mentions the name of a Sahabi? Surah Muhammad. Which surah has no Bismillah at the beginning? Surah At-Tawbah. Which surah is known as the Surah of the Throne? Surah Al-Baqarah. Which surah was revealed last? Surah Al-Ma'idah. Which surah was revealed first? Surah Al-Alaq, Iqra. How many sajda, prostration, verses are in the Quran? (14). Which surah is called the mother of the Quran, Al-Kitab? Surah Al-Fatiha. Which surah mentions the story of the people of the cave, Ashab al-Kahf? Surah Al-Kahf. Which surah has 3 names? Surah Isra Bani Israel. How many surahs are Makki, revealed in Mecca? (86). How many surahs are Madani, revealed in Medina? (28). Which surah mentions the Battle of Badr? Surah Al-Anfal. Which surah mentions the hijab, veil, for women? Both A and B Which surah has 286 verses? Surah Al-Baqarah. Which surah is known as the protection from Dajjal? Surah Al-Kahf. Which surah has 2 bismillahs? Surah Naml. Which surah mentions the word Quran first? Surah Al-Baqarah. Which surah is named after a woman? Both A and B. What does Quran mean? To recite. How many angels guard hellfire mentioned in Surah Al-Mudaththir? (19). Which surah is the only one named after a Sahabi? Surah Luqman. Which surah mentions the creation of the universe in 6 days? All of these. Which surah is recommended to read every Friday? Surah Al-Kahf. How many surahs start with the letters Alif Lam Mim? Six. Which surah mentions the Treaty of Hudaybiyah? Surah Al-Fath. Which surah is known as the Great Victory? Surah Fath. Which surah mentions the night of decree, Laylat al-Qudiyah? Surah Qudiyah. Which surah has the longest ayah in the Quran, ayah of debt? Surah Baqarah. Which surah does not start with Bismillah? Surah Tawbah. Which surah ends with the names of 2 angels? Surah Baqarah. How many surahs are named after prophets? 8. Which surah is called the beauty of the Quran? Surah Rahman. Which surah has 50 verses about the hereafter? Surah Qaf. Which surah contains the verse, "Today I have perfected your religion"? Surah Maida. Which surah mentions the story of Musa, Ayahs, and Khidr? Surah Kahf. Which surah has 7 verses? Surah Fatiha. Which surah is known as the chapter of repentance? Surah Tawbah. How many times is Bismillah repeated in the Quran? (114). Which surah describes the miracle of the camel? Surah Ghashiyah. Which surah tells the story of the elephant army? Surah Fil. Which surah has 11 prostrations? Surah Araf. Which surah is known as the chapter of the sun? Surah Shams. Which surah mentions the splitting of the moon? Surah Qamar.